your recovery, it seems to have pivoted on, obviously dying 6 times helps, but
yeah,
it
that'll
seems
get you there.
But it seems to have pivoted on a human being telling you in a really dark moment that she cared.
Oh,
Right.
yeah. I mean, that was it. I mean, there was another moment too that happened before that. Was I was sleeping in a doorway at Christmas time on Christmas Day, and some lady woke me up and she gave me. And I was sleeping in a sleeping bag, cold, and she woke me up. She gave me a coffee, a hug, and $50, and said "Merry Christmas." And she just got up and walked away. And I mean, it was the darkest moment of my life. Christmas was a very tough time for me, especially being homeless on the street and having all my challenges. And I remember just watching her walk down Carroll Street and turn on Pender. I put out so many calls on social media, like, "Hey, if you remember me, I just want to let you know that, like, that moment really meant a lot to me. Like, who stops and wakes somebody up and does that?" And I had so many questions for her. It's like, was that your coffee, or did you buy the coffee ahead of time? And, I was the lucky person that you were going to give it to. What made you stop? Like, it was just so many questions that I have, but that was a really kind moment. And then in 2012, I went to recovery. And I stayed sober actually in 2010 for 1 year. And it's where I met my future wife. But my wife met me in recovery, then lost me to addiction, and we disconnected. So from 2010 to 2000 and about a few years later, she was devastated when I relapsed. But a few years later, she was driving downtown and she saw me on the street, and she pulled over and got out of the car. And I remember the whole street, people were like, "Who's this?" And I looked, and I right away, I just was like, "Oh my God." And I mean, I caused some damage, said some things, basically to F off, get out of my life. And when she came
It's
up,
the old push away. It's the old push away for an addict.
It's a fear response, right?
Yeah.
It's like, I'm a piece of garbage. Just stay away from me. Like, nobody's going to love me. I have too many things going on. I'm too complicated. And I remember her just coming up to me, and she just gave me a big hug, put her hands on my cheeks, and she said, "Guy, this is not you. And I cannot sit around and wait for something that isn't going to happen. Go get some effing help." And I just stared at her. And it was crazy. It's like 6 months later, I wrote her a letter after my last overdose, saying that I was going into this treatment recovery house, and that she'd probably moved on with her life. But I just wanted to let her know, thanks for never giving up on me and always loving me. And, I wish you nothing but the best, but I'm sorry for the things that I said. Well, when I got to the recovery house 3 days later, she showed up, and she said, "If this is what you're wanting to do, then I'm all in to support you." And the rest is really history. And I remember when she came knocking on the door, the guy that ran the recovery, old crusty Jim, I used to call him, but he's a great guy. And as soon as he sees her, he's like, "What the hell is she doing here?" And then she introduces himself, and Jim goes, she goes, "Oh, hey, Jim, I'm a friend of Guy's." I go, "What are you a friend of him for?"
Oh, if it wasn't for your buddies in recovery, right? What are you doing here? You're too good for him.
And Jim, and that's what Jim was like, "This guy's a troublemaker." And she goes, "But he's a good guy." And she goes, he has an impact on people, Jim." And he goes, "Oh, I shouldn't have taken him, but here he is." Like, and then I went out with her, and we went to Starbucks, and that's where she said, "Listen, if this is the life that you want to live, then I want to live it with you." And I actually, I'm kind of a little jokester, so I was like, "Well, I don't think I have any better options, so I'm going to take it."
Well, you can't let her own you that whole day. You got to get a little real estate back in the relationship.
And I tell you, she was the one that taught me how to live, because I didn't know how. Taught me, "Hey, you got to get a job." I was like, "I don't know how to get jobs." She said, "Well, you got to get a resume." I was like, "Well, I don't have a resume." It's like,
how old are you at this time? What are you in your early 40s?
43 when we got Yeah, 43 when we got back together. So
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. So like think about that, right? There are a lot of really ritzy people that can go to Malibu and Passages and all these other places. They just pick up their life when you're done. You get clean and it's like, hey, do you have a bank account? What's that? Hey, do you have a resume? I don't even know where that is. Hey, do you know what a computer is? What's a computer? Like, I mean, you did drugs when fanny packs and computers were in and computers didn't exist. No one
Yeah.
had smartphones, right? So like it's like a
The
fucking brave new world to you.
Yeah, it was like the Motorola big thick phone that you had back in the 90s, like the big brick on your head that you wore, right? It's like, what the hell? Look at how small these things are. You got to touch the screen? You can text somebody? Like, what the hell's up with this? Yeah. No, but I didn't even know how to go. Like, I remember, you know what? Like, I didn't have any credit. I didn't know how to go. I was like, oh, you just go to the bank, they give you a visa. She's like, no, you don't have any credit. And I was like, well, how does that work? I had to go pay the bank to give me a visa. It's like, oh, it's like, yeah, we don't trust you. It's like, I was like, oh, that's how it works. But I would have never been able to do all those things, get a driver's license. I remember my wife was jumping up and down when I passed the learner's license, and I just look at her and I was like, what the hell are you doing? You're embarrassing us. And she's like, no, this is she goes, you were in the downtown east side for decades. Now you got to learn it. Like, I was like, okay. She goes, we're going to go celebrate. Okay. And, I was like, okay. And you know what? That taught me something. You celebrate the small successes in your life that we take for granted, because those small successes lead to big moments in people's lives. And I missed a lot of those along the way. And so she would stop and say, no, this is worth celebrating. And I was like, okay, well, let's go and go out, have a nice meal, and those are the things that she taught me how to enjoy. And I didn't need somebody to tell me how to live anymore. I needed somebody to show me how to live, and she really was the backbone behind everything. And the main, when I got down on myself, she just said, hey, listen, you got to pick yourself up, man. And the funny thing is, I realized throughout life is that nobody's going to feel sorry for you.
No.
Like, you know what I mean? Like,
and in that moment, like, I mean, you can have these aha moments like you had with your nurse. You can have aha moments like you had with Dr. Mate, where he's like, tell me about your childhood. You can have aha moments like the beautiful ones you have with your now wife, where you experience care like you haven't experienced, an unconditional love, which you haven't experienced as a child. You can have those moments, but nothing prepares you for it. It's almost like, I don't know if you're like me, it's almost uncomfortable at the start, the promise of sobriety as it starts coming your way, and that promise of sobriety that you're living as you're explaining these stories to me, which a lot of people don't get to experience, right? They don't get out of it. Is this uncomfortable area because you're not used to being happy. You're not used, like, it's uncomfortable at 43 going, well, I got to get a learner's permit with other 14-year-olds. Like, right. But that's uncomfortable because your ego is involved and you've been shamed your whole life.
Yeah.
Right.
Fear of failure is a big thing in recovery too, right? You're so fearful to make the step because you don't want to have the attachment of failure behind it, right?
Yeah.
But see, now I don't look at it as that I failed. I look at it as that I learned a lot. And you know what? Lived experience, the stuff that we got, you can't buy it, right? But
dude, we get along so well because we both were really good at doing substances.
Oh yeah, and too, like I said, lived experience, you can't buy it, but it's going to cost a lot. And it did. It nearly cost us, it cost us everything. And that's why I try to educate people is that but again, we have to keep people alive to get there. I can work with people who aren't dead. I can't work with anybody when they're dead. And that's my approach has been, it's that I've lost so many people. And I don't care if you're a politician and you've been doing this for 25 years or you've been sitting in office, you haven't done what I've done. And you haven't done what many others have done. And you haven't been in the struggle. And this is the thing is that, there's many different pathways for people to get it, but you can't force people down one road. And a lot of the times I feel these politicians are trying to do that. They're trying to fit, a round or square peg
in a round hole.
Yeah. And I'm like, no, like this is going to cause irreparable harm.
Yeah, jail, the penal institution, like treating anybody that has an addiction like they're a criminal. It's criminal that we don't give people in therapeutic recovery situations, we don't give them that trauma recovery. This is not something that exists. Like, I mean, you had a really good doctor in Dr. Mate. You really did, who was like, hey, listen, you do drugs not because you have a disease. You do drugs because you are fucked because you had a shitty childhood.
Yeah.
And it's pretty simple. You didn't get the skills. You ran, and you've got this deficit of tools to be able to deal with conflict resolution. You have a deficit when it comes to confidence. You've got a deficit when it comes to your self-worth. You have a deficit. Yeah. And that's what needs to be dealt with for those people, and keeping them alive long enough to do that so they can experience that promise is your goal. And it's beautiful to watch. You know, I've been educated by a few people on Twitter from afar. What you've done for me, which you continue to do for so many people by educating them, is you've changed my mind, you know, and made me want to learn more about harm reduction, and made me so much more empathetic to people that have issues. And I believe I am, you know, I believe I'm not judgmental. And I watch you get judged a lot by even recovery people on there. They're like, you're doing it wrong, dude. You're doing it wrong. And I'm like, what the fuck are you telling him what he's doing? He's been doing it for 30 years. He did it right, better than anyone I've ever met in my life. And now he's like the most qualified guy to talk about it, which makes the promise so interesting. And I think maybe that's a really cool place to kind of jump off so that you can get to the rest of your day. But, you know, can you explain in AA, a lot of people don't know how it works, and I'm not giving up anything. When you go up and you talk, and I've been fortunate enough to be able to share my story with lots of people in those really interesting situations. You talk about, you know, how it was, what happened, and what things are like now. Like, how is your life now? We've got the how it was. We got the what happened, and it was gnarly. But if you're talking to someone that's listening to this podcast, that's like, I identify with everything both of those two jokers talked about.
Yeah.
Can you explain the promise you live today that you didn't think you'd find to that still suffering drug addict or alcoholic?
Yeah, that we do recover, man. Like, you know, that's the gift is that, you know, we do figure out a better way. And, you know, one of the things that I've looked back off, that probably the easiest thing I've ever done, which is not easy, was get off the drugs. The hardest thing that I've ever done was, you know, regulate my emotions and deal with how I felt about myself as a person. And that is an ongoing
liking
process.
Yourself.
That I'm lovable, that, you know, that people care about me. And I really, you know, and too, in the beginning, I mean, I was going to, you know, NA meetings, AA meetings, meeting people. My thing wasn't so much the meeting aspect. It was the connections with people. And those stories that people are sharing with me is that, wow, you were there and now you're this. And those were the inspiring things where I believe that, well, why not me? Like, why can't I do it? And, you know, I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to dream as big as possible. And, you know, I just did it one day at a time. And those promises do appear. I think the thing that we have to remember is that we're consistently evolving and working on ourselves. And we don't got this. And the most important thing is where people say, well, you've got, you know, 12 years or 20 years sober. I'm like, no.
5 a.m. this morning, dude. When I woke up, 5 a.m. this morning.
That's it. Yeah. I got today. That's it. Big deal that I got 12 years. Who cares? The real thing is that I only got today, because today is going to have enough challenges in itself, and I'm going to have to remain focused and steadfast. And if I do what I did yesterday, today, then the chances are pretty good that I'm not going to use drugs again. And those gifts start to appear when you keep showing up. But recovery is about putting in a lot of work and effort as well, too, right? Like, you have to show up. And sometimes I don't show up fully, you know, and that's cool, man. Like, you know, some days are a grind still, and some days aren't. But I will tell you this, is that it's good to know that I'm loved. It's good to know that I'm supported, and it's good to know that I have people in my corner. And that's what started to really make these gifts progress. And I remember even when I got my first job, I got a job and they asked if, Guy, do you know how to use a computer? And I said, well, I know how much they're worth and which ones I can sell. And they were like, we're going to hire a tech specialist to help you learn the computer. But I was
I know where to sell them for more and get
Oh,
them
I'll
for
tell you,
free.
I'll tell you how much that sucker's worth right now. We'll get a good penny for it though. And they were like, okay, but you see, but these people knew me for so long, and they cared about me, and they took the time to teach me too as well. And I needed that to feel successful. And in the beginning, it was really heartwarming just to know that at the end of the day, no matter what happened, is I came back home and I had a woman that loved me and cared about me. And to me now, I have three beautiful kids. I have a family. I have my in-laws. I have, I rekindled my relationship with my dad.
Mm.
All those things that you thought were gone can come back, and you can recover and live a life that's worth living.
Well, it
And
sounds like you're having those things for the first time. It's not like they even came back. Right?
I'm reliving my childhood through my kids,
Mm.
which is the greatest gift.
Mm.
Like, I mean, we're
They play
collecting.
with Grandpa on the floor. They run around with Grandpa when he's over. Nona. No.
Yeah, I mean, he did. Now he has dementia now, but it's progressed. But man, you know what? And my dad too is, even in our relationship where we repaired our relationship. Italians don't apologize for anything that they've done in their lives to their kids. Like, they just don't. But how they apologize is how
Nod
you
and
look at.
wink.
Well, you know what he said? He said, "I'm proud of you." Like, and that to me was him saying it. So I mean, I got emotional when he said that. I mean, I needed to hear that from him. And when he said that, "I'm proud of you, Guy," that to me, it was a really defining moment when I was like, yeah, I'm proud too.